The fortress shook as the core collapsed. Dust rained from the ceiling and the air filled with the sound of groaning metal. Lila knelt on the cold floor, her body trembling with exhaustion, her breath coming in short gasps. Ember lay beside her. His golden light dimmed but steady, his warm side pressed against her like an anchor. Nyra stood a few steps away, watching the last sparks of the sentinel fade into silence. For a long moment no one moved. The only sound was the slow drip of water from a broken pipe and the soft hum of Ember's breath. Then, deep in the planet, something shifted. A low rumble rolled through the tunnels, followed by a distant crash. The Cathari stronghold was falling apart. "We have to go," Nyra said, her voice calm but urgent. Lila nodded and pushed herself up. Her legs ached and her head felt light, but she forced herself to stand. Ember rose with her, his wings folding tight against his back. He was smaller again, the surge of power having drained him too. They moved quickly through the crumbling tunnels, Nyra leading the way, her blades ready in case any hunters remained. But the fortress was empty. The Cathari had fled or fallen. The network that held them together was broken, and without it they were lost. When they finally emerged into the open air, the sky was changing. The thick clouds of ash were thinning, letting through the first true sunlight Series 7 had seen in months. It was pale and weak, but it was light, real light. Lila stopped and looked up, tears in her eyes. Ember sat beside her, his head resting on her knee. Nyra stood a little apart, her silver eyes scanning the horizon. "It's over," Lila whispered. "Not over," Nyra said. "But the worst is past. The harvest has stopped. Other worlds will live, and here, maybe life can return." Lila looked at her. "What will you do now?" Nyra was quiet for a long time. Then she turned fully to face Lila. "I have broken my order's command. I spared you when I was told to kill. I helped destroy a Cathari stronghold. I am no longer welcome among my people." "You could stay," Lila said. "With us." Nyra smiled, but it was sad. "My path is not here. There are others like you out there. Empaths, starborn hosts, rebels. I must find them. Warn them, protect them. That is my oath now." Lila nodded. She understood. Nyra was not made for peace. She was made for purpose. Then she asked the question that had burned in her since that first night. "Why did you spare me that first night, really?" Nyra looked at her, her silver eyes deep and ancient. "Because when I saw you standing in the ruins, alone and broken but still breathing, I saw my sister." Lila blinked. "Your sister?" Her name was Lyra, Nyra said softly. "She was younger than me, full of fire. She believed in mercy even when our order said there was none. During the first purge on Helios 9, she found a human child hiding in a storage unit. The order commanded her to kill it. She refused. She gave her life to hide that child, to give it a chance." Nyra's voice cracked just once. "I was there. I watched her die. And for years I told myself she was foolish, weak. But seeing you, standing in your own ruins, still holding on, I realized she was right. Some things are worth dying for, and some people are worth sparing." She stepped closer. "You reminded me that empathy is not weakness. It is the strongest force in the universe, and that is why I could not kill you." Lila felt tears fall. She had spent so long thinking she was nothing, just a survivor, just a ghost. But to Nyra she was a reminder of love, of sacrifice, of hope. "Thank you," Lila said. Nyra nodded. Then she reached into her cloak and pulled out a small silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. She pressed it into Lila's hand. "If you ever need me, burn this under a full moon. The smoke will find me." Lila closed her fingers around it. "I hope I never have to," Nyra smiled. Then she turned and walked toward the ridge, her cloak rippling in the wind. She did not look back. And just like the first time, she vanished into the light, leaving only silence behind. Lila stood there for a long time, the pendant warm in her palm, Ember leaning against her leg. The sun climbed higher. Birds, real birds, not Cathari drones, called from the ruins. Somewhere, water trickled into a dry riverbed. Life was returning. Over the next weeks, Lila and Ember began to rebuild, not just a shelter, but a home. They cleared rubble from the old market square. They planted seeds salvaged from the lab ruins. They gathered survivors, first one, then three, then a dozen, who had hidden deep underground during the invasion. They came because they heard the Cathari were gone. They stayed because they saw Lila and Ember working together, sharing food, healing the wounded. Lila did not call herself a leader, but people listened when she spoke. They trusted her calm voice. her steady hands, the way Ember watched over them all like a silent guardian. At night, she would sit on the edge of the square, looking up at the stars. Ember would curl around her, his warmth keeping the cold away. She thought of Nira, flying through the void, protecting others like her. She thought of her brother and hoped he would be proud. She was no longer just Lila Cruz, scavenger of Series 7. She was Lila Cruz, the girl who faced a machine with nothing but her heart, and the galaxy would remember. Far away, on a nameless moon, Nira stood on a cliff and watched a human colony ship land safely in the valley below. She touched the scar on her temple and whispered a single word into the wind. Live. Back on Series 7, Ember lifted his head and let out a soft golden roar, a sound not of war, but of peace, and the stars above shone a little brighter. Dawn came gray and cold over Series 7. The sky hung low with ash clouds, and the wind carried the distant hum of Cathari engines. Lila stood at the edge of the ruins, her coat pulled tight, her breath forming small clouds in the air. Ember stood beside her, larger now, his shoulders nearly as tall as her waist, his copper scales gleaming with an inner fire. Nira waited a few steps ahead, her silver eyes scanning the horizon, her twin blades sheathed but ready. They had spent the night preparing. Lila had wrapped her boots in cloth to muffle sound. Nira had drawn a map in the dust, a path through old maintenance tunnels that led deep beneath the surface, straight to the Genesis core. It was risky. The tunnels were unstable, and the Cathari had sensors everywhere. But it was the only way. Stay close, Nira said. And do not speak unless I do, Lila nodded. Ember rumbled softly, a sound that meant he understood. They moved like shadows through the dead city. Nira led, her steps light and sure. Lila followed, her eyes darting to every flicker of movement. Ember brought up the rear, his claws silent on the stone, his spines dimmed to avoid detection. They passed broken homes, empty markets, the husk of a school where children once played. Layla kept her eyes forward. She could not afford to remember now. After an hour, they reached a rusted hatch half buried in rubble. Nira pried it open with a tool from her belt. Cold air rushed out, smelling of metal and damp earth. Stairs descended into darkness. This is it, Nira whispered. They climbed down, the hatch closing behind them with a soft clang. The tunnel was narrow, lit only by faint emergency strips long past their prime. Water dripped from the ceiling. Pipes groaned under unseen pressure. Lila kept one hand on the wall, the other resting on Ember's back for balance. They walked for what felt like hours. The deeper they went, the warmer it became. The hum grew louder. Not just engines now, but something deeper, older. A pulse like a giant heart beating under the planet's skin. Finally, they reached a massive door. It was sealed with Cathari glyphs that glowed red. Nira studied it, then pulled a small device from her cloak. She pressed it to the lock. Sparks flew. The glyphs flickered and died. The door slid open with a hiss. Beyond it lay the core chamber. It was vast, a cavernous space lit by swirling rings of blue energy that floated around a central pillar of crystal and steel. The air crackled with power. In the center, suspended in midair, was the Sentinel. It was not a machine in the usual sense. It had no body, no limbs. It was a shifting mass of liquid metal and stolen faces. Human, Cathari, even some Lila did not recognize. Eyes blinked across its surface. Mouths opened and closed in silent screams. It pulsed with the same rhythm as the core, feeding on the empathy it harvested. Nira stepped forward. Stay behind me. But the Sentinel had already seen them. A wave of force slammed into the room. Nira was thrown back, crashing into the wall. Ember roared and leapt in front of Lila, his spines blazing gold. The Sentinel turned its many eyes toward them. Intruders, it said, its voice a chorus of whispers. Empath host detected. Terminate. Cathari hunters dropped from hidden vents in the ceiling, weapons raised. Nira was on her feet in an instant, blades flashing. She moved like lightning, cutting down one hunter then another. But more kept coming. The room filled with the sounds of battle. Clashing metal, plasma fire, Ember's snarls as he breathed streams of solar flame. Lila stood frozen, her heart pounding. She wanted to run, to hide. But then she looked at Ember. He was fighting not just for her, but for everything she carried inside. She stepped forward. The Sentinel turned fully toward her. You are weak, it said. Your kind always breaks. Maybe, Lila said, her voice shaking but clear. But we also heal. She closed her eyes. She did not think of fear. She thought of her mother's hands, rough from work but always gentle. She thought of her brother sharing his food. She thought of neighbors singing songs in the dark to keep hope alive. She thought of Ember's warmth on cold nights. She thought of Naira sparing her life when she had every reason not to. Tears ran down her face. And then she opened her heart. Not as a weapon, as a gift. A wave of golden light erupted from her chest, the scale flaring to life, Ember roaring in harmony, the very air trembling with raw, unfiltered empathy. The sentinel staggered. Its liquid form rippled. The stolen faces twisted in confusion. This is not logic, it whispered. No, Lila said. It's love. The light grew brighter. The core's rings flickered. Cracks spread across the central pillar. The Cathari hunters froze, their systems overwhelmed by the emotional surge. Nira used the moment to strike, cutting down the last two with swift, silent grace. Ember rose into the air, wings unfurling, larger now, wider than the room should allow, glowing like a newborn star. He let out a cry that shook the walls, and fire, not of destruction but of cleansing, poured from his mouth, wrapping around the sentinel. The machine screamed as its stolen memories burned away. One by one, the faces vanished, returning to peace. The sentinel shrank, then collapsed into a pool of still metal. The core exploded in a silent burst of light. The room went dark. Then, slowly, emergency lights flickered on. Lila fell to her knees, exhausted. Ember landed beside her, nuzzling her gently. Naira approached, her clothes torn, her face streaked with soot, but her eyes bright. You did it, she said. We did it, Lila whispered. Above them, deep in the planet's crust, the Cathari network began to fail. Across 3 star systems, harvesting stations went silent. Empaths woke from their fear. Children stopped crying. Somewhere, a mother held her child and felt hope for the first time in years. The war was not over, but the tide had turned, and in the heart of a dead world, a scavenger, an assassin, and a dragon stood together, not as survivors, but as saviors. Naira slept for 2 days. During that time, Lila kept watch, her back against the cold wall of the storage room. Ember curled at her feet like a living shield. The dragon's golden light had faded after healing Nira, but his spine still glowed faintly whenever Cathari drones passed overhead. Lila learned to read his moods, the way his tail flicked when danger neared, the soft hum in his chest when all was calm. He was more than a companion now. He was her warning, her warmth, her only friend in a dead world. On the 3rd morning, Nira woke. She sat up slowly, her silver eyes sharp despite her weakness. The violet wound on her side had closed, leaving only a thin scar that shimmered like distant stars. She looked at Ember first, then at Lila, and for the first time, something like respect passed over her face. You saved me, she said. You saved me first, Lila replied. Naira nodded as if that settled something between them. She reached into her cloak and pulled out a small vial of clear liquid. She drank it in one gulp, then sighed as color returned to her pale skin. My name is Nira, she said. Of the Veiled Order. Lila Cruz, Lila said. Scavenger, survivor, nothing more. Naira smiled faintly. You are more. Ember chose you. That alone makes you rare. Lila looked down at the dragon, who was watching Naira with calm golden eyes. What is he really? Ember is a starborn dragon, Naira said, her voice low with reverence. Once they soared between galaxies, bonded to those who carried the light of empathy in their blood. They were not pets. They were partners, guardians. The Cathari fear them more than any weapon. Why? Because empathy is chaos to them, Nira explained. The Cathari are hive-minded. They think in patterns, in logic, in control. But empathy, true empathy, cannot be predicted. It makes humans do strange things. Sacrifice, forgive, love even when it hurts. That is why the Cathari came here. Not just to conquer. To harvest, Lila frowned. Harvest what? Your DNA, Nira said. Specifically the genes that allow deep emotional connection. They are building a weapon, a virus that will strip empathy from entire species. Once released, it will turn whole civilizations into obedient drones. And humanity. Humanity is the richest source they have ever found. Lila's stomach twisted. So they killed everyone. Just to steal our feelings, not just feelings, Naira said. The ability to feel for others. To care beyond survival. That is the fire they want to extinguish. Lila thought of her brother giving his last ration bar to a crying child during the first evacuation. She thought of neighbors sharing blankets in the cold. of strangers risking their lives to carry the wounded. That was humanity. Messy, foolish, beautiful humanity. "Why didn't you kill me that first night?" she asked quietly. Naira looked away for a moment. Then she met Lila's eyes. "I was sent to eliminate you." Lila stiffened. Ember growled softly. "But when I saw you," Nira continued, "I saw something else. You were alone, starving, surrounded by death. Yet you did not curse the sky. You did not break. You kept moving. And when I looked into your eyes, I felt a resonance. Like a song I had not heard in centuries. That is when I knew Ember had already chosen you. And if a starborn dragon bonds to a human, that human carries the seed of the old light. Killing you would have been like killing hope itself." Lila didn't know what to say. She had spent weeks thinking she was nothing, just another ghost in the ruins. But Nira spoke as if she mattered. "The Veiled Order," Lila said. "Are you like space elves?" Nira almost laughed. "We are older than your stars. Once we watched over the balance of life in the galaxy. We did not rule. We protected. But time changed us. Power corrupted some. Now the order is broken. Many serve the Cathari, hunting down empaths like you for reward. I am one of the few who still remember our oath." "So you're a rebel." "I am a guardian," Naira corrected gently. "And now so are you." Lila shook her head. "I'm not a fighter. I barely survived this long by hiding." "You do not need to fight with blades," Naira said. "Ember fights with you. And your empathy, that is your weapon. The Cathari cannot understand it. They cannot block it. If you learn to use it, you can break their machines, confuse their minds, even turn their own weapons against them." "How? By feeling," Naira said. "Not just your pain, theirs, their fear, their emptiness. When you face them, do not hate, understand, that is how you win." Lila thought about that. It sounded impossible. But then again, so did a dragon sleeping at her feet. Over the next few days, Naira grew stronger. She taught Lila small things. How to move without sound. How to read the wind for approaching ships. How to sense lies in a person's voice. In return, Lila shared her knowledge of the ruins, the hidden paths, the places where Cathari rarely looked. They were an odd pair, the ancient assassin and the broken scavenger, but they began to trust each other. Ember watched them both, his presence a quiet bridge between two worlds. One night, as they sat by a dim heat lamp salvaged from old lab gear, Naira spoke again. "There is a place beneath this planet," she said, "the Genesis Core. It was built by humans long ago to heal Series 7's atmosphere, but the Cathari took it. They turned it into a signal amplifier. From there, they broadcast the empathy harvesting wave across 3 star systems. If we destroy it, we stop the harvest, maybe even save other worlds." "How do we get in?" Lila asked. "The core is deep, guarded by a sentinel, a machine made of stolen minds. It reads thoughts, predicts moves, adapts instantly. No blade can cut it. No bomb can shake it." Then how Naira looked at Ember. "The sentinel is logic, but Ember is life, and you are the heart that connects them. If you stand before it and open yourself, not with fear but with truth, it may falter. Even machines built on stolen feelings cannot withstand real ones." Lila swallowed. "What if it kills me? Then you die as you lived," Naira said. "With courage." Ember nudged Lila's hand, his golden eyes full of trust. Lila took a deep breath. She thought of her brother, of the people lost, of the children the Cathari would erase if no one stopped them. "Okay," she said. "We go," Nira nodded. "We leave at dawn." That night Lila did not sleep. She sat with Ember, her hand resting on his warm scales, feeling the steady pulse of his life beneath her fingers. She thought about fire in the blood, about songs in the stars, about being chosen not for strength but for kindness. And for the first time since the invasion, she did not feel like a ghost. She felt like a spark, and sparks, she knew, could start fires. Lila did not sleep for 3 nights after the assassin left. She moved from ruin to ruin, always watching the sky, always feeling the weight of the scale against her chest. It never cooled. It pulsed like a second heartbeat, steady and calm, even when her own raced with fear. She tried to ignore it, tried to focus on survival, finding water, avoiding Cathari patrols, patching the holes in her boots, but the scale would not let her forget. It hummed when danger neared. It grew warm when she passed certain ruins. Once it even vibrated softly when she whispered her brother's name to the wind. On the 4th night, she took shelter in the collapsed dome of an old research lab. The building had once studied alien flora, Or so the faded sign said. Now its walls were cracked open like a broken egg, and vines thicker than her arm snaked through the rubble. It was dangerous, unstable, dark, and full of places where things could hide, but it was also deep. Cathari drones rarely flew this low, and Lila needed rest. Her body ached. Her eyes burned. She curled up behind a fallen console, wrapped her coat tight, and let her eyes close. She did not sleep long. A sound woke her. Not a shout, not a crash, but a low, rumbling growl like distant thunder trapped underground. Lila sat up fast, knife in hand. The moonlight barely reached this deep into the ruin, but she could see movement near the far wall. Something small, low to the ground, shifting in the shadows. Her breath caught. She stayed still, waiting. The creature stepped into a patch of pale light. It was no bigger than a large dog, but built like a predator, lean muscles under smooth, copper-colored scales that gleamed like old coins. Its eyes were wide, intelligent and golden, with slitted pupils that narrowed as they locked onto Lila. Two small horns curled back from its skull, and a ridge of spines ran down its spine, glowing faintly at the tips. Its tail flicked once slowly like a cat's. Lila had seen Cathari bioforms before, twisted things made of metal and flesh. But this was different. This felt natural, alive in a way the invaders never were. The creature sniffed the air. Then without warning it padded toward her. Lila raised her knife. "Stay back," the creature stopped. It tilted its head, ears small and pointed like a bat's, twitching. Then it made a soft sound, almost like a purr. Lila's hand shook. She didn't want to kill it. It hadn't attacked. But she couldn't trust anything out here. Not anymore. Then she felt it. The scale in her pocket grew hot. Not burning, but warm, like sunlight on skin, and the creature's eyes dropped to her chest. It took another step, then another, until it was just an arm's length away. Slowly, Lila reached into her coat and pulled out the scale. The moment it left her pocket, the creature's whole body tensed. Its golden eyes widened. It let out a soft chirp, almost like relief. Then it lowered its head and nudged her hand with its snout. Gentle, careful, like it was afraid of hurting her. Lila stared. "You know this?" The creature rumbled again, then sat back on its haunches. It looked at her, then at the scale, then back at her. It was waiting. Lila didn't understand, but something in her chest loosened. She lowered her knife. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." From that night on, the creature stayed with her. Lila called it Ember, for the way its scales caught the light like smoldering fire. Ember followed her through the ruins, always a few steps behind, always alert. It warned her of Cathari patrols with a low growl or a flick of its tail. It found clean water in hidden cisterns. Once, when Lila twisted her ankle climbing over rubble, Ember curled around her legs, its body radiating warmth that eased the pain. They didn't speak, not with words, but they understood each other. Ember would nudge her toward certain paths. Lila would share her food, dried strips of protein cake, bitter root stew, and Ember would eat daintily, then lick her fingers clean. At night, it slept curled against her back, its breathing slow and steady. Lila began to feel less alone. But questions grew in her mind. Where had Ember come from? Why did it react to the scale? What was it? She found answers sooner than she expected. One evening, as they sheltered in the hollow of a downed transport ship, Lila held the scale in her palm and watched Ember stare at it. "You're not just some wild animal, are you?" she asked softly. Ember blinked slowly, then tapped the scale with one clawed foot. A spark jumped from its claw to the scale, and for a second, the whole thing blazed with light, gold, red, white like a tiny star. Lila gasped. In that flash, images filled her mind, not clear pictures, but feelings, warmth, loyalty, a sky full of twin suns, a great winged shape soaring through clouds, and a voice, not words, but a presence saying, "Chosen." She dropped the scale, heart pounding. Ember looked at her, concerned. It whined softly and pressed its head against her knee. "You showed me something?" Lila said, voice shaking. "You're connected to this." "To me?" Ember nodded. "Yes." Over the next few days, Lila tested it. She learned that when she held the scale and focused on Ember, she could sense its emotions. Hunger, caution, comfort, and Ember seemed to understand her thoughts too. If she thought danger, it would freeze. If she thought water, it would lead her to a hidden spring. It was more than a pet. It was a partner, but their peace did not last. On the 10th night with Ember, the sky turned red, not from sunset, from fire. Cathari drop pods slammed into the plains beyond the ruins, their engines screaming as they tore through the atmosphere. Searchlights cut through the smoke, sweeping the ground like hungry eyes. Lila pulled Ember into a drainage tunnel, pressing them both flat against the cold metal floor. "They're hunting something," she whispered. Ember's spines glowed brighter, a sign Lila had learned meant fear or warning. Then a new sound. Not Cathari, not human. A high-pitched whine like metal tearing, followed by a scream that cut off too fast. Lila peeked through a crack in the tunnel grate. On the ridge above, silhouetted against the burning sky, stood the assassin. Naira, Lila had given her a name in her mind, though she didn't know it yet, was fighting 3 Cathari hunters. Her blades moved like silver lightning, cutting through armor as if it were paper, but she was bleeding. Violet light seeped from a wound in her side, dripping onto the dust like liquid starlight. One of the hunters fired a plasma lance. Naira dodged, but not fast enough. The blast grazed her leg and she stumbled. Lila's breath caught. She should run. She should hide. But something in her chest pulled her forward. Ember growled low but didn't stop her. Lila climbed out of the tunnel, keeping to the shadows. She moved fast, silent, just like Naira had. When she reached the base of the ridge, she saw Naira collapse behind a broken wall, her silver eyes dim. Lila didn't think. She ran. She reached the assassin just as the last hunter raised its weapon. Without hesitation, Lila threw her knife. It struck the hunter's neck joint, the one weak spot she'd learned from scavenging their dead. The creature gurgled and fell. Naira looked up, surprised. "You," she breathed. "Come on," Lila said, pulling her arm over her shoulder. "We have to go." Naira was heavier than she looked, but Lila managed. Ember appeared at her side, growling at the fallen hunters, ready to fight if needed. Together they dragged Naira into the tunnel and deep into the ruins. Far from the red lights and the screams, in a dry storage room lined with cracked ceramic tanks, Lila laid Naira down. The violet blood was spreading. It smelled like ozone and burnt sugar. "Why did you help me?" Naira asked, voice weak. "You spared me first," Lila said, tearing a strip from her coat to press against the wound. "And you left me this." She pulled out the scale. Naira's eyes softened. "It chose you." "Not me." Ember crept closer, sniffing Naira cautiously. Then, to Lila's shock, it placed one clawed foot on Naira's chest, right over her heart. A soft golden light spread from its touch. Naira gasped as the violet blood began to slow. "What is it?" Naira whispered. "His name is Ember," Lila said. "And I think he's why you didn't kill me." Naira closed her eyes. "The Starborn," she murmured. "I thought they were all gone." Lila didn't understand. But as Ember's light filled the room, warming the cold stone, she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same. The war was no longer just about survival. It was about something deeper. Something older. And she, Leela Cruz, scavenger of Series 7, was now part of it. On the cracked plains of Series 7, where the wind howled through broken towers and rusted metal groaned under the weight of silence, Leela Cruz moved like a ghost. Her boots kicked up gray dust that clung to her worn jacket and stung her eyes. Once this place had been full of life. Children laughing in the domes, farmers tending hydroponic gardens, traders haggling over star fuel and synth grain. Now it was just bones and echoes. The Cathari had come without warning, their ships dark as storm clouds, their soldiers faceless behind mirrored masks. They didn't conquer. They emptied, and Series 7 was hollow. Lila had survived by staying small, staying quiet. She slept in collapsed service tunnels, drank from condensation traps, and ate whatever she could scavenge. Old ration packs, dried fungus, sometimes the bitter roots of mutated weeds. She hadn't seen another human in 23 days, not since the last evacuation shuttle exploded on the launch pad, taking with it the last hope of escape. She kept a small locket around her neck, empty now, but once it held a photo of her little brother. She didn't open it anymore. She didn't need to. His face was burned into her mind. That night the sky changed. It wasn't the usual dull orange of Series 7's dying sun. Something else cut through the clouds, silent, sharp, and wrong. No engine roar, no warning flare. Just a streak of black against the stars, then stillness. Lila froze behind the skeleton of an old cargo hauler, her breath shallow. She knew better than to assume it was friendly. Nothing was friendly out here anymore. From the ridge above the ruins, a figure stepped into view. tall and slender, wrapped in a cloak that seemed to drink the light around it. The stranger moved without sound. Even the dust didn't stir beneath their boots. Layla's hand went to the knife at her belt. Though she knew it wouldn't matter. This wasn't a scavenger. This wasn't even Cathari. Something older. Something stranger. The figure stopped at the edge of the crater where Lila's home used to be. Moonlight caught the sharp line of their jaw, the curve of pointed ears peeking through dark hair. Their skin was pale, almost glowing like polished stone under starlight, and their eyes, silver, bright, and unblinking, locked onto Lila's hiding place. Lila's heart hammered. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Maybe if she stayed still enough, they'd think she was just another piece of wreckage. But the stranger knew. They turned fully toward her, one hand resting on the hilt of a blade at their hip. The weapon hummed faintly, a low vibration that made Lila's teeth ache. She braced for death. She'd seen what those blades could do. Cathari warlords had fallen to them in seconds during the early days of the invasion. Rumors said the assassins who wielded them weren't human. They were something else. Ancient, merciless. The figure took a step forward, then another. Lila squeezed her eyes shut. She thought of her brother's laugh. She thought of warm bread from the market. She thought of sunlight on clean water. She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't scream, but the blow never came. Instead, a voice, soft, clear, and oddly gentle, cut through the wind. "You are not the one I seek." Lila opened her eyes. The assassin stood just 3 meters away, close enough to see the fine silver scars tracing their temple, close enough to smell the faint scent of ozone and something like crushed pine needles. Their expression wasn't cruel. It was curious, almost sad. Lila swallowed. "Who are you looking for?" The assassin didn't answer right away. Their silver eyes flickered toward the ruins, then back to Lila. "Someone who carries fire in their blood," they said. "Someone the Cathari want dead before they wake." "I'm just a scavenger," Lila said, her voice rough from disuse. "I don't know what you're talking about." The assassin studied her for a long moment. Then slowly they reached into a pouch at their belt and pulled out a single object. It was about the size of a coin, but shaped like a teardrop. Its surface shimmered, gold, red, violet, shifting like oil on water. It pulsed faintly as if alive. "Keep this," the assassin said, holding it out. "It will find you when the time comes." Lila hesitated. "Why are you giving me this? Why not kill me like the others?" The assassin's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Because you smell of ash, but your heart still beats like a drum in the dark. That means something." Before Lila could respond, the assassin turned and walked back toward the ridge. Their cloak rippled, and for a second, the air around them warped like heat over sand. Then they were gone. No ship, no sound, just empty night. Lila stood there, trembling, the strange scale warm in her palm. It didn't burn. It didn't shock. It just hummed, a quiet rhythm that matched her own pulse. She tucked it into the inner pocket of her jacket, right over her heart. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she watched the stars, wondering who the assassin was, why they'd spared her, and what fire in the blood could possibly mean. She thought about the rumors, whispers of elf-like warriors from the void, guardians of forgotten oaths, enemies of the Cathari Empire. She'd always thought they were just stories told to keep children calm during blackouts. But now, holding the glowing scale, she wasn't so sure. Hours passed. The wind shifted. And deep in the ruins behind her, something shifted too. A low sound, like stone grinding on stone, echoed from the collapsed dome of the old xenobiology lab. Lila spun, knife ready. Her eyes scanned the darkness. Nothing moved. But the feeling was like being watched by something ancient and patient. She took a step back, then another. The scale in her pocket grew warmer, and far below the rubble, deep in the earth, something opened its eyes.